Hi and welcome to today's Conceive Baby discussion. I'm your host, Tasha Jennings, and today we're going to be talking about an aspect of fertility that is often overlooked, yet is proving to have significant impact on fertility outcomes, especially in cases in otherwise unexplained infertility. And that's infection. And my guest today is Elizabeth Mucci. Elizabeth is a scientist, nutritionist and herbalist with a master's in reproductive medicine and over 18 years experience as a clinician and teacher. Elizabeth has helped thousands of patients start their families, manage chronic illness, lose weight, gain hormonal balance and overcome a range of unresolved health issues. The combination of Elizabeth's education in science, nutrition, herbal and reproductive medicine, along with her close work with a number of Sydney's top fertility specialists, has provided her with a unique perspective on hormonal and reproductive health. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, Tasha.
Look, it's really lovely to have you today. And I know we're speaking off air a little bit about the role of infection and how prevalent we are finding it to be, particularly as naturopaths and nutritionists who, we do see a lot of people who've been through the failed IVF cycles and struggling with that diagnosis or, undiagnosis of unexplained infertility. And infection is proving to play a major role. So can you talk to that a little bit today? What role does it play in infection, in infertility?
Yeah, it plays a major role. It's more about trying to find the particular infection, treat it well, and to reduce inflammation, which infection can do, and also endometriosis that it can do. It's not just about falling pregnant with these infections. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So, you might be speaking to a friend that's fallen pregnant and they may have the infection, but later you're hearing about a tragedy where their waters have broken midway through their pregnancy and it could have been prevented. It's that sort of stuff. It's a bit more it can be quite horrifying in some cases where it just could have been prevented if it actually would have been seeked out, dealt with. A lot of the girls and couples think they're infertile and it's actually an infection that's been there that's stopping that implantation happening. And so, and then finally they might get that pregnancy only to have their waters break at 14 weeks or 17 weeks down the track, So for me, it's something I really seek out for because I don't want anybody to experience that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, it seems to affect all stages. So implantation and so endometriosis, obviously we'll just speak a bit to that because people obviously know endometriosis, which is the, uterine lining outside of the womb. But endometriosis is something different. Can you just talk a little bit on that?
Well, it's just an inflamed endometrial lining.
Yeah.
So when any of that sort of stuff happens, in our body, nothing actually happens, on its own. There's a whole biochemical sort of setup that's happening. And in some people, they might be quite ill and can fall pregnant and they're fine with that infection. And other people could just have a simple cough and that's affecting them. Uterine-wise, it's the same. You might have people that have got a common infection that, they may have managed to get through to a premature sort of level. And so their baby's alive, but they're going into birth at 30 weeks, where a person can't even get past 8 weeks with an endometriosis, So if you're already part of the group that's actually quite infertile, or you're trying to figure out why in the world am I making these A-grade embryos and nothing's sticking, then really look into that sort of stuff because the next stage could be something quite horrible to go through where you're losing your baby at, 17 weeks or something,
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking for people who especially obviously, oftentimes have gone through multiple cycles of IVF, and I'm seeing it as well, A-grade embryos, and they're just not working, and there's no reason why that. And it's obviously extremely frustrating for the couples going through that. So when we're talking infection, I know, when we think about fertility and infection, automatically we think STDs. Yeah. But, it's not just STDs, is it? So what other infections are you looking for?
So infections are going to raise your natural killer cells. So often to me, that's that's a big clue. If they've gone and done tests and they're going, you've got natural killer cells, they should be thinking, okay, maybe I've got an infection that nobody's checking me for. Our body's trying to fight something that could be there, whether they've got the tools to check for it or not, whether they're, I know in other countries like in America, in England, where I've worked with patients, they struggle to get the tests done. So a lot of the time where people have got high success rates in those areas, you'll see when you look at their protocol with the IVF process, they will do 10 days of doxycycline before they go and implant. And they get a higher success rate because they've already probably treated some of these infections like ureaplasma and mycoplasma, which are common. They're anaerobes, so you won't find them in a pap smear. So they've got to actually ask the lab to grow these, do this test outside of oxygen, and then they'll see it growing instead of just going, after 48 hours, there is no infection. That doesn't mean there's not an infection. So, and because they're common, a lot of doctors are brushing it off. So they go, that's common, but they just shouldn't be in the uterus,
Okay. So is that something you can request from GPs? You were saying it's obviously difficult in some countries. I guess specifically Australia, I guess can we request that from a GP to get these ureaplasma or mycoplasma tested for?
You can. So those particular bugs like to live near the cervix. And so you could be getting a swab in the wrong area and still not finding the result that you're looking for if it's there. So it's got to be a high vaginal swab that has to be done. And that GP has to ask the laboratory to specifically test for ureaplasma and mycoplasma. If they don't, they're going to come back maybe a negative because they have just gone and grown this in oxygen instead of outside of oxygen. So they're still not going to find it. And that's so many of my patients where they've gone to their GP, they've not asked for it, they've come back negative, gone back and it's positive because they've actually done it the way that needed it to be done,
And I'm seeing natural killer cells cover a lot. I get, a lot of patients come and I've got natural killer cells, and I guess some of the treatment is steroid treatment, and what they're doing is, I guess, suppressing the natural killer cells. Well, what are your comments and thoughts on that?
Look, I've had lots of patients in this scenario where they have come to me with, I know I have natural killer cells, I've done years of IVF, and so I need you to help me with the natural killer cells. And so, first of all, we'll check for infection. A lot of them have had infection. We've dealt with that, and their natural killer cells have dropped. But even in cases where I don't even get them to recheck, I will work on their autoimmune responses. We'll use herbs for that. And then, it's very rare that I would have someone using a steroid in here, and I've got very high success rates. It's very rare. It will only be because that patient has fallen pregnant and is too scared not to use a steroid because they have never been pregnant before. And so they're trying not to, they just want to have everything thrown at them so that they can actually fall pregnant, stay pregnant. But I've had lots of girls that have just never been pregnant and done years of steroids on and off through IVF and then gone on to have babies without steroids.
Yeah.
When I was doing my master's, this was a big contentious issue. Doctors have argued about this because they're saying unless we can check people that have had children and check or do biopsies on their uterus, we can't say that natural killer cells have an impact at all, actually, just pure natural killer cells where there's no infection in place, because we haven't checked women that maybe have had natural killer cells and they're absolutely fine.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
And so there's lots of diseases and autoimmune responses where, we would be dealing with someone who has Hashimoto's or cardiolipin levels are high or whatever, and we will manage them with herbs and nutrients just to make sure that, their body's not going into an overkill. But with where the implantation happens, when the embryo's implanting, right around that spot, you have a heightened immune system so that it protects the embryo from being attacked. It's more the fact that if it's overdoing it, it can actually work against you. So it's more about getting that uterine lining in really good shape and your immune system in really good shape so that, you're not overdoing that. But you're always going to have a immune response where that implantation's happening.
Yeah, and a balanced response is what we want. It is foreign DNA. We need acceptance of that embryo in there. Exactly. And I covered this in a previous webinar with Professor Sarah Robertson on the immune system, and we talked about steroids, and she was actually very anti-steroids, which was interesting to hear from a researcher in that area. But it's still something that I see a lot of people come to me on from IVF clinics. So would you say it's still a reasonable mainstay in the patients that you see?
100%. They will, and a lot of the time, even if patients haven't come up with high phospholipids or cardiolipin, doctors will still be using steroids and, aspirins and things that you would use in those scenarios, but they're using them anyway because they're just sort of at their wits' ends, not knowing what's going on. And then I've had patients be tested positive for urea plasma or mycoplasma, got rid of it, bang, they're falling pregnant on the withdrawal method, trying not to fall pregnant when I'm still pregnant. And they've just done years of IVF,
Yeah, because I guess, if we are suppressing the immune system and there is an underlying infection, that's not being treated still. It's still, we're just suppressing the immune system.
Exactly.
So clearing the infection. So, I mean, when we're talking infection, is this like a common cold sort of thing? Or, what sort of, is there symptoms people should be looking for when we're talking infection, infertility?
Look, it can be not a common cold, that won't tend to do it, but you will find some flus will, it depends on who's experiencing the flu, right? So someone who's already weak and then they're experiencing this really nasty flu, their body's going to turn around and go, can't hold this load right now. This is going to drain me way too much, because really it is a parasite. An embryo is there sucking the life out of you. You're not getting anything in return from this. You've got to be in good shape. So if you're not, the body will make that choice. This is now not that safe for me to hold this. And so therefore next time, and so you just miscarry. And it depends. Some of the infections themselves will actually make the embryo quite unwell, or whether you had a fever, with that infection, that could cause too much DNA sort of distortion, which is why I don't want, patients overheating themselves either, for the same sort of reason. I don't want that heating up for the embryo to be distorted, when it's going through differentiation, like this is the eyes, this is the legs, this is the arms, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you find there any phase that is more affected? We talked about implantation and obviously those growth phase of the important, organs and things like that. And then, even later on, water's breaking. Is it, pretty common throughout that infection plays a role?
It depends on the infection. So again, like, urinary tract infection can definitely play a major role in miscarriage. And then things like urea plasma, can sort of get into the waters and make their way up. E. coli is a big one as well. Just getting up. So if you go and swim in dirty water, you could have, some issues going on there. And the cervix just opens up all of a sudden and then the waters break. Waters breaking is a really common sort of thing. So it is something to just make sure that, just because you're not falling pregnant might not mean that you're not carrying the very thing that if you were pregnant would cause some waters to break. It's just happening way earlier.
Yeah.
In a particular case. I've also found that people with a weakened immune system, say hay fever and sinus issues and asthma, they're way more sensitive. So when they're getting sick a little bit differently to maybe someone who's quite robust. And things like just being really smart with how you, cleanliness and all that sort of stuff, so you can reduce your chances. But the cytomegalovirus, for instance, I check all my patients for it to see if they've been exposed or not been exposed. That's another virus that can cause retardation in the child, toxoplasmosis, blindness in your baby. For me, it's always about going in there with eyes wide open so you know what you've been exposed to, what you haven't. If your friend goes, oh, look, I can't come out tonight because my kids are sick. How about you come to my place? You're going, it's okay. Let's just let away, because they could have the cytomegalovirus or parvovirus and you're just not sure,
Yeah. So when we're talking these infections, are these any symptoms? Like, or do you have to be symptomatic for there to be an infection? Obviously, are there low-grade infections that people may not be aware they are carrying? It's just raising their natural killer cells to a certain level.
100%.
Yeah, okay.
So a lot of them are asymptomatic. Endometriosis can be asymptomatic, stage 4. So that's how asymptomatic it can be. You could be going along thinking absolutely fine, and then we're doing swabs and they've got heaps of infections and they've got all sorts of things happening, but they've had no symptoms. And that's a lot of the pain tolerance, of people, and, how their systems are working with infections, without. Are they people that drink alcohol or not? Will they be in the middle of a cascade? If their diet's fairly good, they might be feeling it a lot less. It doesn't mean that infection's not there. It doesn't mean it can't cause tragedy,
And as you said, we all deal with them differently. Our pain tolerance and also, feeling tired or feeling run down is kind of a mainstay these days, and people might dismiss that as a symptom of infection and just that's part of life. But so, they can go, I guess, undiagnosed, which is the scary thing. So, I mean, you talked about some preventative measures there, washing our hands, all the basic stuff. How do we get these infections? I often speak to patients about these, and the first thing they say is, oh, I've never had any STDs. As we said, it's not just about a sexually transmitted infection. How do we get these other types of infections that you've mentioned that we may not have heard of?
Well, some of them are sexually transmitted, but they're not considered STDs, like the neoplasmas and the mycoplasmas. They're quite common in those areas. They could be living in your bowel. So you've had a bowel, bad gut sort of dose of gastro or whatever, and it's splashing around, and then it comes up and starts traveling up. Your partner may have had one other partner before and therefore then has brought in this, or you may have. It's not necessarily like, oh, well, is this person, I've had to sort of bring on an STD sort of scenario. It's just so common, but it's just because it lives in the bowel and it can live in other areas. It's really easy to sort of, if you've wiped yourself the wrong way or, that sort of stuff. That's why the other thing too, that's a really common one that people don't think about with these infections. And every time there's a procedure that's happened, you are at risk of getting these procedures. So a lot of the IVF people who have gone and had procedures have maybe contracted these infections from that procedure, or even more from, like I've had patients that go, oh, this is weird. Like I've been infertile for 5 years, but I fell pregnant first go with my first baby. And so I'll say, did you have a Caesar? And I go, yeah, I did, And so they've ended up with ureaplasma or mycoplasma through the Caesar.
Right.
Or they've had a miscarriage, so they've had one baby, gone and had a miscarriage with the second, had a DNC and contracted the infection that way, and gone on. I had one patient that had 12 miscarriages after that, and then it was, we just got rid of the infection and bang, went on to have another couple of babies, So it's that sort of stuff. Whenever there's a procedure, whether you've had a episiotomy or whatever has happened, that's why for me, I always just think it's better to be safe than sorry. Or if you're in a country where they won't check it, maybe just do a 7-day treatment of doxycycline or something like that, just so that you can just be cleared of the infection that possibly could be there.
And that's something we often wouldn't think about, I think, especially with women. Obviously Caesar is a big one that people don't actually think of as a procedure, really. I mean, you're having a baby, but it is a clinical procedure, and it is the risk of infection in any procedure, obviously. And what about the women who do possibly get multiple procedures, who do have endometriosis? And obviously the treatment for endometriosis, if it is severe, is to get a scrape and to clear it out. Is that something you still recommend for your endo patients? So, to get a scrape, to get the endo cleared out if there is a risk of infection?
Yeah. So I will, because if I look at the two evils, and I look at their age, and I look at, possibly, because with endometriosis, you sometimes may fall pregnant and actually miscarry with it. And so if you're looking at that sort of thing, because it can affect the quality of the eggs. So, for me, it's like, let's start a clean slate, and then we check everything, get that all happening, make sure we've got a proper recovery, and then move forward,
And is that always your recommended treatment, to get a course of antibiotics?
For the ureaplasma and mycoplasma?
Yeah, for those two, or for any infection. Obviously, it differs per infection. Your treatment would differ depending on what you find. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So for Candida, I won't necessarily sort of suggest that sort of stuff. That would be a last resort, just because we've got such amazing tools for dealing with that. And a lot of time, we're setting up a body that actually grows it all. So, you want to sort of deal with that. Plus, I don't really want them to have the body that actually has encouraged it through pregnancy, because it's not great for a pregnant woman to be in that state. It's not great for the baby, you know. So that's the way I sort of deal with that. If it's strep B, I don't tend to encourage it. I will intend to encourage natural treatments for it, and then recheck it, down the track. But for ones that I want speed, and I know that it can create quite tragic sort of situations, I'll use an antibiotic.
Yeah. So to get this treatment and get these answers, if people listening today thinking, I've got recurrent infections, I'm struggling with IVF, is obviously naturopath or nutritionist, and to get answers from their GP, where would you recommend these people first port of call to go?
So if they can use, like, they're either the naturopath or herbalist or practitioner to sort of help manage everything.
Yeah.
Kind of get the, sure, you might have to use an antibiotic, but you really want to make sure that you're doing the right things while you use the antibiotic. And it's not just about that. You want to get a really good functioning uterus, because that uterus has now got to function for the next 9 months really healthily. And so it's not just about infections here. That's sort of like a really easy way to quickly get some, quick turnaround. But, some patients will have, their placentas stop working all of a sudden down the track, or their uterus isn't working down the track. The blood flow to the uterus isn't great, so then they're dealing with either a preemie situation, or the baby stops growing around 30 weeks, So there's so much that we can do as practitioners to help a really healthy outcome. So much that we can do. Like, I've been in situations where the baby's, in a much older mother that's 43, 45, where their growth is really slowed down around that 32-week mark, and they're in the 5th percentile. And I've brought in herbs, and within 10 days they're in 25th percentile, and bang, they're just growing really quickly. And the obstetricians that work with me have seen this over and over. So it's they just know, they can't deny it. Like, they're supposed to be getting worse as the pregnancy's progressing, and all of a sudden they're having this big jump in cellular function and stuff like that. So if I think if you can sort of do your homework, get a really great practitioner, someone that's got some great education, who's, cluey, who's got a great mannerism that you feel really comfortable to tell everything to, that's what you want. And then get them to help guide you with what questions to ask the GP. And so, but if you've got a great GP and you haven't got a practitioner nearby, yeah, sure, go straight to your GP and just say, look, I really want this, please, I really want this. I've already gone through all of this stuff. And ask them. So a lot of them will sort of help you out. They might not have ever done it before. They might, sit there and go, how do you spell this infection? They may do that. It depends on their exposure. But they want to help you, because they know that, this has been a massive struggle. You will talk to other people who will go, no, I've talked to people and they've said it's no big deal, and there's no evidence, even though there is evidence, but they might say there's no evidence or whatever. It's just more the fact that they haven't been exposed to it. That might not be their area. And so that's why you want to pick a GP that's very much into this area, because they will be more open. And a lot of them really want to learn this stuff because they want to help a whole heap of people. So you're looking at their nature, then, that sort of thing. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's great advice, because I've had, similar circumstances where I've recommended patients to go get these tests done, and the GP has just said, no, it's nothing to do with that. That's not to do with your fertility problems, and won't test. So I think it is really important that you get someone who is on board. And obviously, as you say, this is something that has a lot of times we see women who's been struggling for years with, you know, fertility issues, multiple miscarriage, IVF failure. So, you know, if you can find a GP who is sensitive to that and will say, hey, I don't know what that is, but if you think it's got something to do with your condition, you know, let's give this a try, because obviously you're out of answers so far, then that is a great way to go, and to work with your naturopath and nutritionist, obviously, alongside that to support the health of the uterus prior to and during as well.
Yeah.
Is there any dietary advice that you specifically work with? I mean, I won't go into herbs a bit today. Obviously, you know, as naturopaths, we do work a lot with herbs. What sort of dietary advice do you recommend to patients when they're trying to conceive, if they're struggling with fertility, or all during those precious, you know, early stages of pregnancy?
The main thing I would say to patients is you want to get some really good fats into your system, really healthy fats, because fats are basically going to help you produce really healthy hormones, right? So, and it is more about that, you know, half the time it's not about whether your body can produce the healthy hormones, it's whether you give it what it needs to produce the healthy hormone. I mean, it's just biochemistry. You don't give it what it needs, it's going to start to drop the ball in areas, and it's going to have an impact. Whether they've got research about that particular thing or not, I think when you get to a certain point, you just want to be as healthy as you can. You know, it's interesting because almost all my friends are doctors and specialists and things like that, and they're really health conscious, and they're very sort of humble people, and you know, they're amazing. And so they will say to me, oh, look, you know, people thought that vitamins had no impact on an embryo or a child until folic acid came up. Oh, that's a big lie. You know, that made a massive difference, you know, and that's just one. Like, you know, just because there's no money in the research of a lot of these things doesn't mean they're not having an impact. So I think if we can just be as healthy as we can and just not, it's about eating well, but it's also about not having the things that actually can do quite a lot of put our body under duress. So then you've got to be processing a whole heap of this rubbish that you've put into your system. Your body can do it, but gee, you've made it a hard job for your body to be healthy. And then there's onslaught after onslaught. And the way that, you know, say for instance, caffeine, you know, it's got a 9-hour half-life. You go and have 2 or 3 a day. By at certain points, it's like you've had 2 or 3 coffees at once that your body is trying to process, you know. And I think what happens with a lot of people is they don't know a lot of the science. It's not sort of well, you know, advertised or talked about, so they think it's all okay. You know, and it's just not. And that's why if you look at things, you know, there was a study done in America a few years ago, quite a few years ago, I think it's probably about 10 now, where they looked at a group that was a religious group. And it was such an eye-opener because they looked at this group that basically get married at very young ages, in their teenage years. They go on to actually have as many children as they can. They don't stop. It's part of their religious nature that they just have children. Now, we've been told that at 40, we've got about a 5% chance of falling pregnant.
Yep.
And in this group, only 17% of those women had lost their fertility. Then we're told 45. We've got a 0.5, only 33% of those women had lost their fertility. So you're sitting there going, they're aging the same. They don't have a longer life than what we do. But what is it about this group? You know, they eat really healthy, they've got great community. But the fact that they actually married at a really young age, they marry as virgins, the husband and the wife, so there's no infections that have been brought into that scenario, and they just have children after children after children. And so they get to their later years and they're still having children. So it's not about egg quality at that point. It's not about how much reserve. A lot of it's got to do with their infection rate. You know, they've had babies from a young age, so therefore their reserve's probably a bit higher. Their endometrial lining's healthier. They probably don't have endometriosis. So there's all these other things that we're actually creating by putting off having babies and, you know, all of that sort of stuff, exposing ourselves to all these infections, you know, that sort of stuff. You know, there's a lot more involved in, you know, do we eat well? You know, do we have great mental state? Do we stress ourselves out? You know, it's not just about food, it's how much we're exposing ourselves to stresses that are just sucking us of nutrients to try and process those stresses, you know.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating study because it is literally same human beings, same piece of people, same biology, but different circumstances, different lifestyle, and completely different reproductive outcomes. So that really does show that what we are doing in our lifestyle, in our health, in our choices that we are making and extending, as you said, most people are waiting longer to have babies, potentially exposed to more infections, that there is a significant difference in that lifestyle, same biology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then these guys aren't drinkers, they're not drug takers, you know, that sort of thing. Well, so everything has a consequence and everything comes with, you know, is what we value more or not. And I just sort of, what I tend to do with my patients is go, let's bring us back to that state as much as we can.
Yeah.
And look, you're sitting around that 35 plus, you probably, there's a higher chance that you could have endometriosis. There's a higher chance you could have infections. You know, there's that sort of stuff. So we've just got to work a little bit harder to get us back to that state. You know, the quality of eggs. I mean, I've had so many times where the quality gets so much better. Where I'm working with IVF specialists, we know that their quality is quite poor. They've come to me, we know that. They've been told to use donor embryo eggs and embryos, and then they go on to do another IVF cycle because they have to. They might not have tubes at this point because they've had 2 ectopic pregnancies, you know, and then their result is so much better, you know.
Yeah.
And it's taken them 3 months to turn everything around and get that quality a lot higher, you know. So, you know, definitely we can have an impact on the quality, definitely.
And there's so much you can do in those 90 days, in that 3 months, you know, when that egg is developing. That is the time that we can, you know, all those good dietary choices, those lifestyle choices make a huge impact. And I know I've spoken on this topic in another webinar about not only impact on the chance of conception, which is obviously what we want, but the future health of the child. Because you are really optimizing, I guess, the DNA that you're passing on to that child. So there's, you know, ramifications across the board. Even for next generations after that, we're finding that these changes, these positive changes we're making can have such a huge impact on our ability to conceive, but also the lifelong health of our future children. So it's wonderful that, you know, as naturopaths, nutritionists, we can work alongside. And I know I work with some wonderful IVF specialists who, and obviously you do yourself, we can optimize obviously the egg health and then the sperm health. And, you know, IVF does an amazing job of people who do, as you said, have blocked tubes and wouldn't actually be able to conceive. And so it's amazing that we can work together to produce the best outcome.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So, I mean, we covered a lot of things to do with infection, and it's been a real eye-opener for me. And I know I've heard you speak on this topic before, and I find it fascinating. I'm really glad that we can start spreading more information and spreading the word about the impact of infections, because I still think it's a little under the radar in a lot of people who are, you know, still in the reproductive industry, but may not be aware of this facet of it. Is there anything we haven't touched on today that you would like to let people know about this topic?
Look, it's more the fact that I think often we're given a diagnosis and we just accept the diagnosis because we think that, look, these are specialists, like, you know, they know. And I think we just want answers. People set the thing, oh, that's why I can't fall pregnant, or that's why I miscarried, and so you just have this accepting sort of thing. And I get that. But, you know, I've had a lot of people come in here where they've had real tragedy, you know, like lost their babies at 18 weeks where the waters have just broken, and their diagnosis is you've got a cervix problem. Unfortunately, it's your cervix. So we just need to stitch it up next time. And, you know, we tried to stitch it, but, you know, it wouldn't hold, or, you know, and then I've checked them for urea plasma. They've had urea plasma. We've removed it. The next time they fall pregnant much faster. They've spent the next 2 years after tragedies like this, 2-3 years, they can't fall pregnant. They fall pregnant straight away at a much older age. And all we've done is got rid of the infection. I've worked on the health of the embryo and egg, but they know that that child had nothing wrong with it. It was tested, before the child that they've lost. And then they've gone on to, we're waiting for this cervix to sort of maybe open, that they might need a stitch and they've been really closed, go full term. Everything was absolutely fine, and they've never had any issues. Girls that have been told they've had natural killer cells, they go full term, all that sort of stuff. I've had women that have had what has been told to them as an autoimmune disease that attacks the placenta. They've lost 2 babies, and one faster than the other. Once they've used medication in the first one, next time they've started the medication, steroids and stuff even earlier, lost that one as well. And just done the 3-month sort of, let's get your system under control. Let's look at inflammation. Let's get, why is it inflamed in the first place? Let's see if we can see what else is going on, because this is not just on its own. This is a whole family of biochemistry that's going on here. Are they eating a lot of sugar? Are they inflaming? Are they drinking a lot of alcohol? Are they doing things that inflames them? And then go on to have 2 babies, full term, never had an issue with their placenta after that again, not needing steroids, not needing anything, So it's more the diagnosis. I think, if anything, you just want to do everything you can in your power that you can control, get that under control, get someone that's got a really clear understanding that can guide you, and, put your best foot forward, and then sort of move with that, instead of like, this stuff just happens to me, or, I just don't think, just get second opinions, third opinions, get out there and start. So, because there is a lot out there that sits in that grey area and, just sort of sits there instead of just investigating, further with what we can sort of do. If we're eating heaps of sugar, we're going to inflame ourselves, we're drinking lots of alcohol. The thing that I think, like you were saying before, 90 days to produce an egg. A lot of people aren't even thinking that far, so they fall pregnant and they go, I just found out I'm pregnant, so I'm going to stop smoking and stop drinking. And so as soon as they stop doing that, they're going to detox on this embryo. The placenta even starting till the 9th week, so they've just dumped all this toxic stuff. I was really fortunate. I got to work with an amazing professor at university. Her specialty was reproduction. And she just, she was looking at caffeine. She had done an experiment where she just gave 1 injection of caffeine into a mother rat and watched with a fluorescent marker, watched where did it go. And it went into all the brains of the offspring and into the testes of the boys. When she did those, their fertility had dropped. When she kept repeating it, in each generation, their fertility was dropping. So just because we have a baby that might have 10 fingers and 10 toes doesn't mean that we haven't weakened its system to be more susceptible maybe to other diseases down the track in its life cycle. So I think to give it its best, its best foot forward in that child's life as far as, immune systems, and we're complicated. We're very complicated. And we want to and our body's pharmacy is amazing. And if we can actually help develop our baby's pharmacy to be amazing, you're just going to, the benefit is, it's ongoing for years and years to come, their fertility, their health, their chances of cancers, stuff like that.
Absolutely. I find it a fascinating topic, and I spoke on this in another webinar about the epigenetics, that we are able to switch things on and off. We are able to optimize what we are passing on to our child. So it's not just about falling pregnant. It's about the health of the DNA that you are passing on, which is really exciting to think about. And I'm always talking about being the best mum starts well before birth. And actually, it starts now. It starts, you are already nourishing all that DNA that has the potential to become your future child. So the nourishing doesn't start just when you get pregnant. I do have that a lot too. I'll start eating healthy now. I'll stop drinking. I'll get really healthy now I'm pregnant. But there's still, obviously that's really important, but there's so much we can do prior to that once we've conceived, it is kind of set in stone. That's, we are from, but there is so much we can do prior to that to optimize that DNA.
And you can't cheat the system. People keep thinking, but the doctor said I've got to hurry, I'm running out of time. And so fallen pregnant and then they miscarry. And so then gone, okay, but I'm still working my 3 months. And then if they go after the 3 months, they go on to have a really healthy baby, but they just wanted to jump the gun first. And so you just cannot cheat the system. If there was an issue with that, you're going to maybe see that issue. And so it's that real Russian roulette sort of thing. If someone is not falling pregnant easily, I would definitely do the 3 months before, because we're looking at why is that happening? What sort of embryos are you producing?
Yeah. And look at the infection, obviously. We start, find out about case history. Often when I do a case history, they've had unexplained infertility, but then when you go back, oh yeah, I was in Bali and then I got this bug here, and then I've had recurrent, urinary tract infections, and I've had thrush, but that's all that they didn't even consider that. So it's
the other way with the Asian countries, like, where they've gone, oh look, I went on a holiday and I fell pregnant. And I go, did you take doxycycline by any chance? I took doxycycline. I was there. I came home because I was relaxed. I fell pregnant. But a lot of the time it's just getting rid of the infection.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And I'll just touch on one thing. I know you spoke about there before, which we have spoken about before. You mentioned, asthma and allergy, but what about autoimmune conditions? I know you briefly touched on it there. Is that something you find more prevalent of these infections in people with autoimmune disease, or are they unrelated?
Oh, I don't see the infections in people with autoimmune. It's more the fact that the autoimmune can sort of occupy that or disturb the immune system, so that the body, you've weakened yourself. So it's sort of focusing more on that than other things. I think, even with sperm, it depends who's got the autoimmune. Sperm's like the canary down the mine shaft. You've got other things that body, why would the body put all this high nutrients in an area that it may never need? So it sort of doesn't, just strips it out of there and goes and puts it where it's needed. Also that, you're preoccupying it, So you get such a benefit from just simply reducing sugar. You're going to get such a benefit. Autoimmune-wise, ovulating better cycles, it just goes on and on. So I think that take-home message, you can just really look at your life in a sense with, if I was put in a jungle, what could I get my hands on? Because that's what we're built like. Could you catch an animal? Yes. Could you fish? Yes. Could you grow greenery? Yes. Could you pick from a tree? Yes, but it'll be from a season. It's that sort of thing. If you can go to that, it's really hard to get a Tim Tam in a jungle, right? Really difficult to get flour so that you can make lots of bread. Like, you just wouldn't be doing that. And so just because we can process it doesn't mean it's not stressing us out,
Yeah, I saw a good quote the other day. It was, the bottom line for all diet is it man-made? If it's man-made, avoid it. If it's nature-made, enjoy. And I think it does come back to, we often get so complex when it comes to diet. There's paleo, there's autoimmune paleo, there's gluten-free, there's so many different incarnations of diets that you can be on these days. But if we just go, as you said, back to basics, what could you find in the jungle? Is it made from nature? Is it able to be got in the jungle, or is it man-made? And that's stuff we should be avoiding.
Yeah, exactly.
And I didn't know, my last webinar actually was with Professor Louise Hull, specifically on sugar and infection, actually doing another trial coming up in Melbourne starting in December or January, I think, and looking at the impact of sugar. In the previous study they did looked at the impact of sugar on the egg and the sperm, so actually at a biological level, and found a significant impact of sugar, and now they're taking it to human trials. Definitely. You can't get, Tim Tams or your big jug white sugar in the jungle. So, important information to leave everyone on. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your, I know, very, very busy schedule to be with us tonight. So I hope everyone's got some great insights into some possible causes of that very frustrating diagnosis of unexplained infertility. So thanks for being with Elizabeth, and I would love to have you on again. So we'll be in touch. And for everyone else, thank you very much for joining us. Be sure to log on to conceivebaby.com.au and sign up for future events. And if you're listening on iTunes, be sure to give us a review. I look forward to seeing you next time.